All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College online AWD or Application and Web Development 1100 C# programming class, for the spring 2024 semester, I've been doing a series of video presentations. Now, most of these presentations have been based off the PowerPoint slides for our textbook for the class, which is Muroc C# 8th edition. I've also done several videos where I worked on a payroll application that I added features and functionality to as we went through other chapters or additional chapters. And then I kind of morphed that into an employee thing once we got into talking about object-oriented programming. So we've done all of section 1. We've done all of section 2. We've done all of section 3. We've done all of section 4. And in section 4, I did 2 or 3 programs using LINQ and a couple database programs to start with. They weren't even really database programs, but they were examples of how to use databases. And the first one I used MySQL, and you can watch that one at your leisure. And the last one I used SQL Server. So there's 3 chapters left, and I am going to be working as the semester goes on creating some kind of a project with databases. But for now, I'm just going to go over, I might only do 3 more videos. I don't know. Chapters 20, 21, and 22. Now, Chapter 20, which is on how to use Entity Framework Core, is a long chapter. It's 50 pages long. All right, so we're going to talk about that. I'm going to take my time. If I need 2 lectures for Chapter 20, then 2 for 21, then 2 for 22, then so be it. All right. So for Chapter 20, here we go. How to use Entity Framework Core, also known as EF Core. So our applied objectives here, there are 4. Create a data model from an existing database. Use LINQ to retrieve data from 1 or more database tables. Use EF Core to add, modify, and delete rows in a database table. Bind controls to an entity collection or the results of a query. We have 7 knowledge objectives, it looks like. Number 1, explain how EF Core works. Number 2, describe these terms as they relate to EF Core. DB context, entity class, navigation property and association. Number 3, describe how to add EF packages to a project. Number 4, describe how to modify the code generated by EF Core. Number 5, describe how to use eager loading and explicit loading to load related objects. Number 6, describe a concurrency conflict and distinguish between these 2 types of concurrency control, last in wins and optimistic. And number 7, describe how to use a data access class to encapsulate your EF Core code. Now, they're showing here, as it says, this is a diagram about how all this stuff works. And as you can see, there's a lot of stuff going back and forth. All right. So you've got a data model that is feeding into EF Core. All right, the data model consists of entity classes. The EF Core basically feeds into and gets back from ADO.NET. The ADO.NET data provider goes to the database server, and the database server goes to the database, which goes back to the database management system, which goes back to the .NET data provider, which goes back to the Entity Framework Core, which goes back to the DB context class. If you understood every bit of that, fantastic. And if you didn't, hopefully you'll understand a little more of it as you keep watching. So, as they mention here, EF Core provides a layer between the database for an app and the objects for an app. All right, to provide the interface between the objects and the database, it uses a DB context class and what are referred to as entity classes. When you execute a query with LINQ, EF Core translates the query and sends it to the data provider to be sent to the database. When the results or the result set is returned from the database, EF Core again translates those into the objects defined by the entity classes. It also provides for tracking changes and submitting said changes to the database. So there's two ways of querying a database, and I have shown you both, but you haven't really seen any in any kind, or either of these, in any kind of real database, super database application. All right, so the first thing they talk about in here is how to open the NuGet package manager. I'm just going to show you this right now. I'm not actually going to use this. Maybe I will. We'll see. But if I go out to Tools and I go to NuGet package manager, there's three options in here. All right. The first one is package manager console, and that one will be used when you have to add what's called a migration to a database. All right. It'll also be used when you have to update a database. More on that later. The second one that's in here, manage NuGet packages for a solution. If you go and choose that one, it shows you, it kind of breaks this up, and it says, this is what you've got installed in here, which is nothing. All right. But if you browse, it shows you the different things that you can install. Now, looking in our chapter here, that was the tools, NuGet Package Manager, manage NuGet packages for solution. And they're saying here, there is an EF Core package. Okay, so if we do come in here, in fact, there's really more than one, but if we come in here to, where are we? To our, there. And if I come in here and I type in Entity Framework Core, all right, you'll see that I'm in browse mode, so it's going to show me what it can find, if anything, for Entity Framework Core. And it looks like I spelled it wrong, so it's got to be Core. All right, so that's what it's searching for in here. Well, it says error occurred. Show errors in output. The remote name could not be resolved. Okay, I'm not sure what that is. But when I go under browse here, and this will always depend on the version I am using, and that could be what this is. That could be the problem here. I don't know. But I'm going to come in here and try this again. And I'm going to put in Microsoft dot, spell it right, MICROSOFT dot ENTITYFRAMEWORK Microsoft dot Entity Framework Core. Now, if it still gives me an error, I'm surprised, but I'm not sure why it would do this. All right, again, it's saying that an error occurred. I'm not sure why it would do that, but let's just keep going. That is the way that you do it. Oh, maybe it's because I'm not on the internet. Just got a new modem yesterday. Doesn't appear like it's getting much better. So, going back to here. All right, and Entity Framework Core, let's hit enter. See if it finds anything now. Not sure why, and it looks like it's still giving me an error, and I really and truly don't know why. Now it's there we go. So you see there's a whole bunch of stuff here that starts with Microsoft.Entity Framework Core. Here's the core itself. I will tell you, when you get into the AWD1100 class and you're working with ASP.NET, you're almost always going to be adding Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.SQL Server and Microsoft.entityframework.core.tools. But this is what's available. And this is just some of it. See, there's more in here also. All right. So the NuGet packages, package manager with the EF Core package selected. So here they have SQL Server. All right, right there. So let's go and use that one. In fact, I'm going to use both the ones that I mentioned to you. So I'm going to use SQL Server here. And when you do this and you choose it, it brings up a dialog over here. If you click on Project, it'll highlight both of them. All right. And if you click Install, it'll attempt to install them. Now, if there's a problem with the installation, in other words, if you are running a lower version of something and it doesn't understand it, it will not go in and actually do the install. If I click I accept here, I'm getting an error. And it says, could not install 8.1. You're trying to install this package with a project that targets framework version 4.72, but it does not contain any entity, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I'm doing it right, but there is a problem with the version I'm running. So let's see if we go here and we go to project and we go to, let's go back to here and let's click on project and on this project. And as you can see, it says I'm running 4.7.2. Now I can go up to 4.8, but that's it unless I install other things here, which I sure don't want to do. So it could be the choices that I made when I started here. I don't know. All right. Parameters for the scaffold DB context command. There's connection, provider, output directory, context, data annotation, use database names, and force. And I think we'll talk about some of these as we go on. Common values used in a connection string. And now what they're showing here is an example of how you would use this. Now, this is really ugly, but it's not that bad if you go in and break it down. All right. So what we're doing here is we're telling it we want to make a connection. And the connection is going to be on our machine. And what we want to connect to is off of the C drive, C# folder, database folder, a file called mmabooks.mdf. All right. Now, as it says, that is a command. And then they've got another copy of it where they say the flags are omitted. It's going to be a little smaller. All right. DB context class is used to communicate with the database. The entity classes represent the objects used by the app. That doesn't probably make a lot of sense. All right. But notice the DB context class communicates with the database. All right. There's the DB context class in there that's communicating with the database. The entity classes represents the objects used by the app. When you do this, all right, this is all stuff that we're going to get into. I don't know if we get into it here, but we will definitely get into this, or you will definitely get into this in the AWD1100 class in summer 2024. And that is, you can go and you can build these kinds of apps really in a couple of different ways. You can build them either code first or database first. All right. Now, most of the work I believe that you're going to do in the AWD1100 class is going to be code first. And in code first, you go in and you create classes. Those classes After you add a database migration and update your database, those classes become the tables in your database. All right. If you go the other way and you go database first, you create the database, you run a bunch of this stuff, and it goes back and it creates the classes for you. So it's which way do you want to go? All right. So as it says, to generate context and to generate the classes from an existing database, you use this. And then you do this from this package manager console. To show the package manager console, it isn't difficult. You go in, let me close this, and you just say Tools, NuGet Package Manager console, and it comes in down here. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. The other one that's here, so I showed you that one, and under Tools, NuGet Package Manager, Manage Packages, NuGet Packages for Solution, I showed you that. I've never used the Package Manager settings. I've never used this. So as you can see, there's a dialog here and a bunch of settings that you can work with, but I never have. All right, a Visual Studio project with a data model. All right, now if you look over here, we've got a folder, a little hard to see, but when you look at it, you can tell that we have a folder, and that folder has, I shouldn't even say that folder, we've got a project called Customer Maintenance. That project has, amongst other things, a folder called Models. That folder called Models has a data layer in it that has a customers class, an invoice class, an invoice line item class, an order option class, a product class, and a state class. In addition, it has an MMA Books context, which kind of melds everything together. All right. So when you do this and you look at what's in here, again, this looks more like a mess than anything else. But if you start with your database and you do the database first and you run this, it's going to come in and create things for you. All right. And I mean, I whipped through that. I understand that. All right. But we're going to bring up the examples that they have from your textbook in chapters 20, 21, and 22 shortly, and we'll take a look at those. All right. Now, when you come in and you actually start to come in and do this, where you are coming in and you are ending up creating tables, all right, and how your table will look, you can add to those some annotation attributes. For instance, you can signify something as a primary key. You can signify something as a column. You can show the different names, etc. you want to use. If you're putting something in there that's a string, you can say how big maximum size the string can be. And you can have a foreign key. Now, I have not really explained foreign keys. Let me give you a very simple little example here. All right, move this down. All right, so let's suppose, I'm going to cut the size of this down to about 36, that I have a table. All right, and that table has in it in fact, we can use the example that we just had previously. We had that employees table. And if you remember, that employees table had in it, it had an employee ID, it had a first name, it had a last name, it had an address, It had what was called a city ID, a state, and a zip code. All right. Then we also had here a cities table, which was pretty simple. That cities table only had two fields in it, a city ID and a city name. Now, if you look, this field right here, employee ID, was set up as what's called a primary key or a PK. Here, city ID was a primary key or a PK. All right? Now, why am I telling you this? Because you'll notice we've got city ID here, and we've also got city ID here. This city ID in the employees table is known as an FK or a foreign key. We added this field to this table so we would be able to link this table to this table because they have a field in common. Both tables have a city ID field. If I want to add a new city ID and name, I've got to do it in this table. If I want to reference an existing city ID, I do it in this table. But setting it up like this allows me to do what's called a table join. When, for example, I could grab the first name, last name, and address from this table, then the city name from this table, and the state and the zip from this table. And we did that before. All right, and I showed you two different ways of doing it. So what a foreign key is you add the primary key of a table and you add that primary key into another table. And you add it into the other table so that you are able to combine information from both tables. Now, there is actually a relationship between this city ID and this city ID. And the relationship is actually what's typically referred to as a 1 on this side right here. And on this side, it's a many. Now, I'm going to put the number 8, but it actually is an 8 on its side. And that is infinity. What that means is for every one city ID we have in the cities table, we will have 0, 1, or more employees who work in that city. And I don't know if that makes sense. You're going to hear that again, but that is the concept of a foreign key. All right. So what they're showing in here is they are coming through, and notice this is a customer class. This is going to be what is basically a customer table. You're going to have a primary key of customer ID. It'll be an integer. You're going to have a name that's going to be a maximum string length of 100 characters, and it'll be set to null initially. You'll have an address, which is set to 50 characters, which again will be null initially. Then you have an inverse property here, customer. Well, what is this? This is customer, all right? And what this is going to allow us to do right here is it's going to allow us to link to the invoice table. So one customer will be able to have 0, 1, or more invoices. All right. And this is state navigation. I'm not even going to get into that right now. Okay. All right. So here it says we've got an app config file. All right. What's important in this app config file is what's shown right here. And what that says is this is our connection string. So where it says data source equal local db/ms SQL local DB, that means it's on my local machine. And I want to attach from there a database. The database will be in a folder on my C drive, another folder called C# and another folder called database, and it will be mmabooks.mdf. And then add some additional Microsoft security in there. Now, if you're confused and you're like, I have no idea what you're even talking about. Well, imagine this. Okay, so I'm out over here and I'm on my C drive. So I'm out on C:. All right, so that's here. And I've got a C# folder, and that's here. Now I don't have a database folder, so I'd make one. And I don't have the mmabooks.mdf in there. I mean, it's a brand new folder. But if I come in here and I can grab it from here, so there is the file, mmabooks.mdf. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to put it right into here. So now what I'm telling my program to do is to be able to connect to that database. And the reason I want to connect to that database, if you remember what we were actually running in the last two projects that we did, is we ran queries, but we did not have a C# project up at that time. All right. So this is just a bunch of the junk that we're going to have to do. This is going to be doing the configuration. And this says, if it's not configured, configure it. Use SQL Server, and the connection string is going to be for MMA books, which we set up right here. All right. Now, with a lot of the stuff that's in here, I don't want to go into it because it's going to be way, way, way too confusing. It's confusing enough for me, and I don't want to get into it what it might be for you. All right. So we'll talk about it a little bit, but what we're going to do is wait until we get into this part of the course and then start working on some information in here. All right. So this is, as it says, creating a new context. All right. This to list is kind of an important thing because when you are working with SQL Server and you are working with it inside of C#, they can communicate with one another. But when you basically want to be able to go and show the results, for example, of a query that you run against an SQL Server database, if you want to show that in a C# program, you're typically going to have to use the to list, all right, which will convert it over into something that C# can understand. Now, some of the stuff that's in here, not everything, but some of it, hopefully, as we go through it quickly, will make some sense to you. Now, this first one here is a link query. You can tell it is because it's got the lambda symbol. I believe they both may be link queries. But what this says is, all right, for the selected invoice, I want you to go through the invoices folder, and I want you to find an invoice where the invoice ID is equal to 33. If you can find one or more, just return the first one. If you don't find any, return a default, which by default will be null, which means it's non-existent. So that's a way to show this. This is another way of writing it. If you remember earlier, we talked about doing some of this stuff and doing it with link or doing it with SQL Server. And I believe that's the link and that's the SQL Server way of doing it. All right. So what do we have here? As it says, a query that gets selected invoices. Now, this one was designed to just return one. The first one that met the criteria, or default, which normally is going to be null. This says, I want you to go into the invoices, and every time you can find an invoice total that's greater than 250, return to me that customer's ID, the date of the invoice, and the total of the invoice. And when you get done, convert it to a to list so that I'm going to be able to report it in my C# program. All right. Here's a join. So what we're doing is we're joining the customers table with the invoices table. And we're grabbing the customer ID from the customers table. All right. And we're joining that to the customer ID of the invoice table. And we're coming up with the customer name, the invoice date, and the invoice total, which we will run an order by on the customer name. And if there's multiple with the same customer, then we do another order by. The first order by that you see there is an ascending order. This is in descending order, so we get the highest invoice total first. And again, convert it to to list so that we're able to understand that in our program. All right. Now, they're going to talk in here about eager loading and lazy loading. And all that stuff just depends on when you want a query to fire. Do you want it to fire like that immediately? Or do you want it to fire, for lack of better words, when you need it? When you want it to fire immediately, you use eager loading. And when you want it to fire when you need it, you use what's called lazy loading. All right? So as it says, code that explicitly loads the entities on the many side of the relationship. Remember, there's 3 types of relationships that you can get with a database. All right? This that I showed you right here is an example of what's called a one-to-many relationship. Every one of these has 0, 1, or more of these. So every one city ID has 0, 1, or more employees that meet that. So that is a one-to-many relationship. Sometimes you've got a table, and that table has in it a whole bunch of stuff. Remember, this 8 should be sideways. I don't know how I can spin that, so let's see. Infinity symbol. There it is. So see that? So let's see if I can grab this, copy the image, and I have no idea if it'll go in here or not. It won't. Okay. Word, Mac. Copy and paste text symbols. Can I copy that? All right. Can I then paste that over here? I don't know. There you go. So there is my one-to-many relationship. Okay? That's almost considered the nirvana. In other words, that's what you want. All right? Now, if I come in here and I have this, and let's say, and I'm just going to, I'll leave this here and I'll make another one. How's that? Okay? And I'm going to just grab everything that's here, but I'm going to remake it. All right, and I'm going to get rid of this. And I'm going to get rid of this, and this, and this, and this. And for now, I'm just going to make this city name. This is another table. We'll call this imps. Okay. Now I also decide I want to put in here. Okay. Let's say the social security number, and then I want to put in here the department that the person works for, the supervisor that the person reports to, and the salary of the person. Well, two things. First of all, you should notice that this is getting pretty big. All right. There's what, at least 10 fields in here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 fields. Some of these are employee information, and some of these are personal information. So what if I came in here and call this personal? Okay. And then I came in here and called an employee. There's a reason if you just follow along with me for a minute. All right. I can grab this. Okay. And I can even make that a primary key. All this stuff I don't really need. But I can now grab this stuff out of here, and I can put in here department, supervisor, salary. So what I have done is I have taken what could conceivably be put into one table, and I've broken it up into two tables. So literally what I have here is what's referred to as a one-to-one relationship, as opposed to the one-to-many that I showed you before. All right, so I showed you previously the one-to-many. This is the one-to-one. Let's look at one more of these. In fact, let's see. I think I'll go back. Okay, that's fine. So I'm going to go back here, and again, just grab everything from here. All right, I'm going to make a new one. And I'll make some changes to it in just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to make one more. And instead of employees, I'm going to call this one customers. And I'm not going to have a city, so this will be customer ID. First name, last name, address, city, we'll say city name again. State and zip code. All right. Now I'm going to make another one here that's going to be called products. And I'm going to have here a product ID, which will be my product, my primary key. I'm going to have a product name. I'm going to have a product description. And I'm going to have a product price. How about product category? And a product price. Now, hopefully you notice, looking at this, there's no field in common. But what if I want to combine information from these? So what if I want to know what customers bought what products? I could take customer ID from here and copy it into here, or product ID from here and copy it into here, but that's not really what I'm looking to do. That's not actually correct. Because many customers can buy many products, and many products can be bought by many different customers. So what I actually have in here is what's typically referred to as an M to N, or a many-to-many relationship. So if I want to combine, what do? The answer is I will typically come in here and create what's called a junction or a join table. So I'm going to make a new table called customers underscore products. All right, and that new table is going to have in it two fields, and that's the primary key of each one of my of what I'm working on here. Let me make this a little smaller. All right, so that's going to have in here the customer ID and the product ID, and these are going to be concatenated, a concatenated primary key, which means this primary key is going to consist of two fields. So I've now explained the three different kinds of relationships that you can have in here. Those being one-to-one, where it would be possible when you are creating a table to put everything in one table, but you decide to break it up into more than one table. So this is a one-to-one relationship, and typically it is shown like this. 1:1. That's a one-to-one relationship. All right. The second one that we talked about, and actually was the first one we talked about, was this one. And this, technically, this one here is referred to as a one-to-many relationship. And that, again, is typically what you are looking for. Is in an ideal world, all of your relationships in a database are going to be one-to-many, but it doesn't always work out that way. Finally, the one we just looked at in here, this is typically referred to as a many-to-many relationship, or an M-to-N. All right, so those are the three typical kinds of relationships that you actually end up working with when you are working with databases in a program. Now, did that help a whole heck of a lot in here? Well, notice when they talk about the many side right now, you at least hopefully have a clue as to what I'm talking about. And there's the one side. Now, again, a lot of this isn't going to make a lot of sense until you get in and start really working with it. All right. I decided to kind of lay off with this, and I am building a project where I hope we're going to be able to go through all of this and it'll make a lot more sense. Now, it says 3 of the methods of the DB set class. And I may have brought this up before. I may not have. I think I have, though. We have talked about CRUD. CRUD is an acronym that stands for Create, Read, Update, and Delete. So what we talk about remove right here, that would be a delete. Update, of course, would be an update. Add would be a create. Create is sometimes, even though it doesn't stay in the CRUD, is sometimes also referred to as insert. All right. Read isn't shown here. But if you remember, all right, when we looked at those examples for the MySQL and the SQL Server, we wrote a lot of select statements. We wrote a couple of updates. We wrote an insert statement. We wrote a couple of update statements, and we wrote a delete statement. So when we're talking CRUD, select is basically the read in CRUD. Insert is basically the create in CRUD. Update, of course, is the update in CRUD. And delete, then, of course, is the delete in CRUD. So if I take this and change the order of these, you'll notice I get CRUD, which is CRUD. All right. So here's adding a new entity. So what is this? They're adding a new customer. So you would have set this up where you've got a customer name, a customer address, a customer city, a customer state, a customer zip code. And if we go back far enough in here, I don't remember exactly where it was, but we had something in here with a customer ID, all right, a name and address, a city, a state, and a zip. All right, they left them off on here, but they said you'd need to put them in. So, name, address, city, state, zip. And then you'd add that entity. When you modify, you're updating something that currently exists. All right, so you're telling it to find that customer, and then you're telling it to change their zip code. All right. When you delete, as it says right there, you're finding the customer, and then you're calling remove. After you do all this stuff, you'll typically, in any operation where you're changing the database, meaning if you are adding something new, updating something that exists, or deleting something that exists, when you get done, you're going to call save changes to write the changes back to the database. All right. Now, when you do this, things can happen. So they show this with database exceptions. Why? What if you try to delete something and the something you're trying to delete isn't there? Or you try to update something and what you try to update isn't there? Or, depending on how you've written this, you try to insert something that already exists. So there's a lot of ways, a lot of possible errors that can happen in here. All right. Now, next, they come in here, right here, and it says a diagram of two users who are working with copies of the same data. So there's me, and there's my friend, John. And we both work for the same company. All right. And when we bring up, our company, let's say we work for Amazon. All right. And when we both bring up a user database, we get a copy of it. Now they've got a products table, and that's fine. We'll use products instead. So I come in there and I open up the products table. Okay. And John opens up the products table. And I make a bunch of changes to the products table and I write them out. And then John makes his changes to the products table and he writes them out. When I say write them out, we're writing them back to the database. Typically, what's going to happen is, I shouldn't even say typically, we can have a problem here with what's referred to as concurrency. We are both concurrently working on the same table. And if we haven't accounted for it, what happens is what's called last in wins. So I come out and write my information from my copy to the database. John writes his after mine. His overwrites mine. You never see my changes. That's called a last in wins. Now, if you don't want to do that, typically the way most companies handle this is with some kind of a locking mechanism. You can lock an entire database. You can lock an entire table. You can just lock a record. All right. But the difference is that if we've got a locking mechanism and John comes in first, let's say we've got a table locking mechanism. So John comes in first and opens up the products table. Now I come in and try to open it up. I'm prohibited from opening it up until John's done with it. And if you say that never happens, it does. Now, I'm not sure if it still works out this way or not, but I remember a few years ago, I wanted to go to a concert. And I got onto Ticketmaster when tickets were on sale. And it came up and it said, this picture will show you all the tickets that are still on sale. You have this for 1 minute and 45 seconds. What that meant was During that 1 minute and 45 seconds, no one else could buy any of those open concert seats because no one knew what I wanted to buy. So I had I had a minute and 45 seconds to go through what was available and either pick out what I want or get out. And then the next person could get in. So that's what we're talking about with concurrency. All right. So here it is in a little more depth and breadth of coverage. When two or more users retrieve the data from the same row of a database table, that's called the same record, you get a concurrency conflict. Because EF Core uses a disconnected architecture, this can happen because we're both working with our own copy. If two users try to update the same row in the table at the same time, the second user's changes, so whoever writes last, could very well overwrite the first user's changes. Whether or not this happens, as it says, depends on the type of concurrency control that the program uses. By default, it's what I just mentioned to you. EF Core uses last in wins, meaning the program doesn't check to see if a row has been changed before it does an update or a delete to change it again. Last in wins, as it says, can lead to errors in the database. When you work with optimistic concurrency, the program, as it says there, checks whether the row that's going to be updated or deleted has been changed since I retrieved it. If it has been changed, I get some kind of an exception telling me that it will not take my change now to try later. So, how to avoid concurrency conflicts? You want to use optimistic concurrency. All right, it says for concurrency conflicts, all right, it says use it where they're likely to be rare, but handle the exceptions that do. Design a program that updates the database and refreshes it often. It might not just be two people working on the same thing, it could be 200. Imagine that you're working in a place like Amazon. All right, I'll always remember this, and you may have heard me say this before. Remember a few years ago, my daughter was going to school at a technical college in Illinois, and she gave me her book list. And I went out to Amazon and was going to buy her books. And I had put a couple of them into a cart. And then I was about to buy them, and she yelled, I was in the basement, she yelled down to me, said, "Don't buy this book yet, because the teacher now, what I understand is they may change it." So it stayed everything stayed in the cart. And then about 15 minutes later, she came back and said, "No, they are going to use that one. Buy it, please." Well, during that interim, somebody else had come in. They didn't have many copies of the book, and there weren't any anymore. All right. So what they did refresh their entity collection frequently. All right. Design a program so it retrieves and updates just one row at a time, or rather than optimistic concurrency, use pessimistic concurrency. As it says, it looks at the database record while it's being updated. All right. That can, as it says, lead to other problems. All right. So they'll talk to you more about concurrency in here, row version. We'll get into all that stuff, but later on. Simulating a concurrency conflict, handling a concurrency exception. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is we are at 55 minutes, just about. We will be when I finish this. All right. So I'm going to break this up into 2 lectures. I'm at 48 of 40. And as we get into talking about binding, which we'll do momentarily, we'll bring this up in part 2. So I'll be back shortly.